Let's start the unit 3. In this unit, I'm going to talk about what historic preservation activities are taking place in Bhaktapur and what are various concerns associated with the conservation practices over there. As I mentioned in unit 2, one of the important preservation activity is to identify a particular boundary for the area we are going to preserve, and usually it's called the monument zone. Now, I mentioned that in Bhaktapur that originally the UNESCO recognized a particular area where there were three public squares and a street connecting those three squares as the monument zone. But in 2003, UNESCO realized that the kind of urbanization happening around Bhaktapur is going to impact the monument zone, the preservation of the monument zone, pretty soon. So the UNESCO considered the Bhaktapur as a World Heritage in danger and started collaborating with the Nepalese government to develop a preservation plan for Bhaktapur and other heritage sites in the Kathmandu Valley World Heritage Site. So originally, this was the area that was considered to be the monument zone, and within that there was a one core area recognized here, and another core area recognized here, and the rest of the area within this dash line boundary was considered the buffer zone. So they realized that this area is not enough to maintain the preservation activities in Bhaktapur. So then what the UNESCO did was UNESCO extended the buffer zone boundary from here, from this boundary to this boundary, pretty much going around and containing the entire boundary of the traditional town as the buffer zone. And then the original buffer zone or the original monument zone was considered core area. So they could tightly control the preservation activities happening in this entire area, and then with a little bit of less restrictive guidelines to control whatever the development that might be happening in this area, as well as the preservation activities in the area. So again, it's very important in historic preservation activities to identify the core area and the buffer area of a historic area that you are going to preserve. That buffer area is very important because it buffers or protects the core area from any other development that might happen around the historic area. Another important aspect of Bhaktapur in the buffer area and as well as in the core area is that the entire the town of Bhaktapur is paved with brick. This was actually a decision made by a group of German architects who came to Bhaktapur to start its preservation activities in 1975 under a financial support given by the German government. They realized that in order to maintain the sense of place in Bhaktapur, it is better to pave the place with bricks rather than asphalt or concrete. So because of that, when you go around Bhaktapur, you feel an incredible timelessness in the place because you don't see any concrete or any asphalt in the area. And all the buildings are made out of brick and the streets are paved with bricks too. And this also helped to maintain a cooler microclimate within the town of Bhaktapur. So I would consider thinking about the pavings of the entire city is also an important aspect in the preservation of the character and the history of this particular place. Now, in order to control the various development activities happening in Bhaktapur, the UNESCO's management plan came up with a height limit for the buildings in Bhaktapur. In order to establish this height limit, they measured the height to the edge of this this eave of the tallest temple from the ground, and they found out that height is about 35 feet. So they established a rule saying that no building should build above that 35 feet height limit. So to keep buildings around the city controlled within a certain height limits, so then you will see these kind of temples very clearly from wherever you are in Bhaktapur. So that's a one kind of preservation mechanism that we bring into the preservation of an area around a historical building. So we can limit the developments happening around that area by having a control of the heights. However, you can see that from this photograph that people have not necessarily paid attention to that height limits. Not only people have built above, they have also have their water tanks and TV antennas and everything placed above that particular height limit. The reason is that there are no strict enforcement of that law in Bhaktapur. So it's not only that you are coming up with preservation mechanisms and measures, but at the same time you need to strictly enforce those rules and controls as well. If you don't have a particular good system to enforce that, then there's no point in having various kind of preservation mechanisms in place. And then there's another problem that you probably see in this view is that there's this telecommunication tower appearing in the same view here. Now, this tower is actually not located next to that temple. It's actually located about a mile away from that temple. But the problem is, because of the height of the tower, that you can see this tower from many places in Bhaktapur. So there's a problem about the management of the view shed around this particular temple when you have this kind of infrastructure project built within the area. So I would consider this as a violation of the height limit, as well as a violation of the view shed preservation around the temple. Now, in Bhaktapur, the municipal government over there wants to maintain the historic character of the facades of the new building. In historic architecture in Bhaktapur, the buildings are faced with a kind of polished decorative brick veneer, and all the door frames, window frames, etc. are richly carved. So because of that, the government provide 100% of reimbursement of the brick veneer that people use to build new construction, and 75% of the cost of the timber, carved timber frameworks that people use for this new construction. So what the government is trying to do is to maintain a historical character in all the new buildings or in new construction. Now, one of the interesting things that you see in this photograph is the building is actually made out of concrete. So if you really look at in the back, the building is made out of concrete frame. And people simply covering the facade of the building with this decorative brick veneer. So there's an argument here. Some architects argue that this is a pseudo-Newari architecture. There is no real authenticity to this architecture. This is a creation of a facadism, just a facade architecture to maintain a historic character of the place. The interiors are not really historic. They are very modern, but just creating a fake historic facade. So this is a question that happens in many historic towns in the preservation activities of those places. Should we maintain an authentic kind of an historic architecture, or should we try to create simply a historic looking facade? What is the best way to go about in a situation like that? So this is a debate that happens in many historic places. Now, another thing happened in Bhaktapur is the ownership of buildings and how those ownership of buildings may impact certain historic properties. Now, in Bhaktapur, historically, extended families live in the same house. Now what is happening is that tradition is being relaxed or start to go away by creating these kind of single family units. So what happens is that when a family want to give different space within the same house to different family units, they have started to vertically divide the building, giving this to one family and giving this to another family, and then they start changing the building the way that they want to. Now look at this here. There was a historic window here. Now these two families simply divided the facade this way, and this family built whatever they want to build there. This family still keep somewhat a traditional facade here, but they have started building some concrete balconies instead of a tile roof, some metal roofs on the building. So this definitely changes the historic value of the place and historic character of the place, especially when you destroy historic component of the building like these windows in this particular way. So this ownership issue was not something that was there traditionally, but something that is happening right now and creating serious issues about the preservation of historic buildings. Now, in Bhaktapur, because the town is pretty small, people can walk to anywhere within 15 to 20 minutes. So most of the people actually walk around the town. They don't use cars or buses or anything like that. Because of the streets are so narrow, the government has prohibited bringing in cars and buses into the town. So because of that, most people use motor bicycles to go through or travel in the town. At certain times, cars are allowed to come in, service vehicles are allowed to come in to the town. So this is another aspect of historic preservation, especially when you are preserving a larger historic area. You need to control the contemporary vehicular use within the town for many different reasons. So you can control the vibration that may create by these vehicles that could impact negatively the foundations of historic buildings. And then the noise and air pollution that might impact the kind of serenity or peacefulness in those towns, as well as the air pollution that may create harmful toxic particles in the air that might impact the historic building materials. In Bhaktapur, it's a really good preservation mechanism to restrict the traffic to very small vehicles and not allowing large buses or trucks to come in. However, people have talked about the kind of problems created by these bikes because there is no speed limits given to these bikes. So they were saying that one of the preservation mechanism should be to impose speed limits even for these motor bicycles. And also maybe some mechanisms or enforcement to control the noise created by these bikes traveling through the city, simply in order to maintain a very calm, peaceful environment within the city, which Bhaktapurians really appreciate. Now, in Bhaktapur, I mentioned that this particular area is considered the core area of the history of the place. But when you talk to the people, they identify many different areas that they consider as important historical places in Bhaktapur and as places that are very important for the heritage of the city. So this is also an aspect that you need to keep in mind. Although you, as historic preservationists and architects who are interested in historic preservation, identify certain area to be preserved, for the people who are living in that area, the importance of the area may go beyond that particular place that you identify. So it's very important to engage the local community living in that area to figure it out actually what are the buildings that are historically and culturally significant for that local community to be preserved and maintained. So it's not only what the architects thinks, but also what the community thinks is important. Another interesting aspect of the Kathmandu Valley heritage, and because of that the heritage of Bhaktapur, is this historic irrigation system that the Malla kings built some hundreds of years ago. What you see here are lots of large scale and medium scale reservoirs and many hundreds of fountains that are built around the city. And all these things are connected. What happens is that through underground channels, pure water from Himalayas are brought into the town. And using a gravity-fed, gravity-related cascading system, the water brought into the town, stored in large-scale reservoirs that are built around the town, and then they are taken again underground into medium size reservoirs, and then from there to take them into smaller fountains located all around the town. All these things happen underground. For example, the water comes from one of these fountains, is collected here, and then it is taken underground and into another fountain that is located slightly below this fountain. And while the water travels underground, it is purified through a different kind of layers of sand and gravel. And then when it come out from the next fountain, it's again a clean water. So these fountain systems work continuously. You can see that water pouring down. This fountain system work continuously. And then people can use water. Whatever the excess water is again taken underground into the next fountain or into a medium-sized reservoir like that, clean it, taken again underground into the next fountain. So this gravity-fed cascading system of reservoirs and fountains is a incredible engineering system that the Malla kings built to supply water to the entire town. These things still work today. Some of them are not highly functional right now because this system has not been preserved or restored. Wherever you go into a fountain or a reservoir like that, next to that there's some kind of shrine built for certain deities. So people consider these fountains as spiritual and sacred places. So preservation of this system seems to be very important for the preservation of the cultural heritage of Bhaktapur. Here is another example of one of those fountains. This is actually located within the palace complex. I'm going to show a view of this next. So this is the fountain system created for that particular fountain. So here's that fountain head again. This is made out of bronze. Now, another interesting aspect of Bhaktapur is that the town has been understood as a symbolic system, what we call a mandala. The idea is that there are 8 temples dedicated to a certain kind of deities located in the periphery of the town here. And then they are called matrikas or mother goddesses. So there is a temple here located which is towards the east side, and this is dedicated to this particular deity called Brahmayani, and she is considered a mother goddess. And then when you move into the city, there is another circle of temples that are dedicated to another type of deity called Ganesha. And there are 8 Ganeshas, and there are 8 temples dedicated to these Ganesha deities. And then if you move further into the town, then there are another circle of shrines dedicated to another type of deity called Bhairavas. Now, these matrikas, Ganeshas or Bhairavas are related in the sense that from the east side, Mother Goddess Brahmayani's temple or the Brahmayani is related to this particular Ganesh called Tvacha Ganesh. And then these two are then related to this Ashtanga Bhairava temple. So then the east side is given to these 3 deities and they are related to each other. So likewise, there is this incredible belief system that they have created in Bhaktapur, and it is actually laid down into the Bhaktapur town by the selection of particular location to build these shrines for these different type of deities. And at the very center of the town over here is the temple for the most powerful mother goddess called Tripura Sundari. People believe that these 8 goddesses who are located in the periphery of the town are actually 8 manifestations of Tripura Sundari's, whose temple is located here. And in addition to that, there is a temple located within the palace complex here that is dedicated to the goddess Thalaju. As I mentioned, that she is the tutelary deity of the Malla kings. So this particular belief system and how this belief system is laid on the ground is an important aspect of the urban form of Bhaktapur. And that is also represented in this mandala drawing in Bhaktapur. For example, this circle represents the outermost periphery of Mother Goddess temples. And here you see the circle of the Bhairavas. And then here you see the circle of Ganeshas. Right in the middle is Tripura Sundari. And then that goddess Thalaju here, and another goddess called Bhadrakali located here. And then there are 3 more Ganesh temples within that. So you can see that the town is represented in this particular mandala form in the way that people understand the town. And in between these various deities, there are other various different kind of deities are drawn here, meaning that there are many more temples dedicated to many different type of deities located in the town, and that is how the town is constructed. And then over here, in this drawing represents the 4 rivers that go around Bhaktapur, and then over here are the foothills of the Himalayas or the foothills of the Kathmandu Valley, and over here you see that these white mountains represents the Himalayas towards the north side. So an interesting thing about this is that deity Brahmayani, who is related to the east cardinal direction, and this is the Bhairava and this is the Ganesha, who are related to the east cardinal direction. In this area, Bhaktapur Mandala, this side indicates the eastern side. But over here, this indicates the northern side. So you cannot necessarily look at this and understand exactly where these particular cardinal directions are, but that is not very important, the way that people understand the town. But the way that people understand the town is that the Mother Goddesses temples are located in the periphery, and then they are most powerful deities. They protect the town from any evil entering into the town. And then right in the middle of the town is the most powerful Mother Goddess, that is Tripura Sundari, and her temple is located in the center of the town. And here along these rivers, they have drawn these various temples and the shrines to indicate that funeral fires and other rituals happen around the city along those banks of those rivers. And here is a photograph of that most powerful Mother Goddess Tripura Sundari's temple. There are 2 different type of temples here. There's an open air shrine called Peet, dedicated to the Mother Goddess, and then there's this deity house, or the house of this Mother Goddess Tripura Sundari. So these 2 type of buildings are given to all these Mother Goddesses in the Bhaktapur pantheon. And here are a couple of images of the other temples, 2 of other temples dedicated to Mother Goddesses. This is the temple dedicated to Brahmayani from the eastern side. This is for another Mother Goddess called Kumari. Now, all these temples are important in certain ways because these are also related to various rituals happening in the town. Now, this is that square called Thaumadi Square. Every year in April, for about 2 weeks, Bhaktapurians celebrate their New Year. And one of the way that they celebrate their New Year is to have this particular chariot built and dedicated to a particular Bhairava deity. And then the people in the town come to pull this chariot to their part of the town. The town is divided, called upper town and lower town. So the people from the upper town comes here, people from the lower town comes here. They try to pull it that way or this way. And this is related to some kind of belief system that they have of the place. This particular belief system is related to the foundation myth of the city of Bhaktapur and country of Nepal. So in this map, I'm showing how these things happen. So here's the Taumadi Square that they start from here. So if the people from the upper town are able to pull the chariot, they would pull it all the way here, and then they will pull after that all the way to the Dattatreya Square, one of the squares that I talked about earlier. If the people from the lower town were able to pull it towards their town side, so they will bring it first to this place called Nasamana, and then after that they will pull it all the way to this particular location called Tekkapokkare. So for 2 weeks, this particular chariot will stay there. And then in the last day of the celebration, they will bring this chariot again to the Taumadi Square, and then they pull it down to this particular space called Yoshin Kale. And at Yoshin Kale, there is a full day celebration of various activities, rituals, animal sacrifices, paying homage to deities, etc. So here you can see that chariot over there. It's packed with people. And when this ceremony starts 2 weeks before, they raise this particular pole here, and it has a flag here. And at the last day, they pull this thing down. It actually represents part of the foundation myth of the city, that there were 2 large cobras, and those cobras were killed by one of the deities, and that is how the town started. And so this pulling down this pole and pulling down the flag represents that killing of those large cobras. And during this time also, they bring out the statue or icons of the other mother goddesses, and they parade these chariots around the city. So to show you some kind of map here, for example, I talked about that Brahmayani, the mother goddess whose temple is located in the eastern side. This is the route for her path. And then this is for the mother goddess Maheshwari. This is her route. Okay, and in the same way, these are allocated for different mother goddesses whose temples are located in these different locations. Now, for example, there's an interesting thing happens here in the rituals. When they bring in the mother goddess Brahmayani's chariot or the parade here, and at the same time, people bring in Maheshwari's chariot here. At some point, these 2 chariots will come together. And then people do what they call is a war between these 2 mother goddesses. Basically, the 2 chariots will be pulled towards each other in an incredibly fast manner, and then they go past by each other, and then they turn, and then they come back again, coming towards each other really, really fast. They do this about 3 times, and then after that they go on their own way. So they enact the kind of contestation between these different deities in that particular way. It's a very interesting set of rituals to see. So what these ritualistic traditions means is that Brahmayani controls this area, and the Maheshwari control this area. And the Mahalakshmi and Mahakali control this area. So you can see that not only these mother goddesses control the periphery of the town, they also have their own geography or territory that they control. So these are very important for the people belief system. So you have to understand that this is not only about historic buildings and shrines and temples, but also what people believe in, what these buildings and places represent to them in terms of their understanding of the town, their understanding of their religion, their understanding of their the goddesses and gods in their pantheon. It's all interwoven together. So by preserving a particular historic building, you are also preserving those belief system and cultural traditions. So you can't really think about the cultural traditions separated from the buildings. You need to think about these as integrated when you try to do preservation activities. Another ritual that happens annually in Bhaktapur is this memorial procession called Gai Jatra. So on a particular day annually, people build these small chariots to represent somebody died in their family in the previous year. So they bring in these chariots dedicated to these ancestors or deceased family members, and then they take these chariots around the town. When they do that, they take a particular path. So here's the palace complex here. So basically they start from here and then they go on this clockwise direction, taking this particular path. And this particular path is called, in Sanskrit language, Pradakshina Patha. What it means is this is the sacred circumambulatory of the town. So the most important thing is that the area within this boundary is considered the most sacred area of the town. Area outside of this boundary is not that sacred in the way that people think. And this is also related to another thing, very interesting thing. The people who are of higher caste groups tend to live very close to that Pradakshina Patha, or the circumambulatory of the city. People who are of lower caste tend to live in the periphery of the town, outside of that sacred boundary. So this is also called social mandala, how the location of different territories, different types of people, different groups of people are determined by the social hierarchy of the place. And another interesting thing is, as you move towards the center of the town, you start to see much more architecturally embellished, elaborated buildings located in the middle of the town. And as you move away from the middle towards the periphery, the buildings become pretty normal and pretty ordinary. So even the architecture and architectural ornamentation and detail and the scale and whatnot are all used to emphasize that sacred and social geography of the place. In addition to that, there are a lot of traditional arts and crafts in Bhaktapur. And all these belief system and related arts and crafts, as I mentioned before, needs to be preserved, needs to be safeguarded, because these are part and parcel of heritage of the place. You can't separate the architectural heritage from these art and crafts and rituals too. They all go together. They all come together to create a one idea of the history and culture of the place. And in addition to that, another interesting thing about Bhaktapur is that the way people live in the place and the local politics that are happening in the place. Wherever you go in Bhaktapur, you see that these people live in the normal, usual way. You can see in this particular photographs, one older woman is probably preparing something, and three women over there just sitting down, watching people going by and chatting, and an older gentleman taking a nap. So you see a incredible local sense of place and local culture when you are in Bhaktapur. Although this is a World Heritage Town, you don't see many tourists here. So you can really experience the local culture in this particular place. There's a reason for that. The reason is the way the local politics operates in Bhaktapur. This particular person is called Narayan Man Bijukche. He's the leading politician in Bhaktapur. He has established a political party called Nepal Workers and Peasants Party, and he's a member of the National Parliament also. And he created this political party as the political party of the Newari people, and his center of power is located in Bhaktapur. And this political party basically control everything happening in the town. So they are not allowing anybody who are outside of the town or who are not Nevaris to buy properties inside the town. So who lives in the town, almost 99%, Newari people who are born and raised within that town. And any person who is coming to buy properties inside are not allowed to buy. Who are coming from outside of Nepal, outside of Bhaktapur, to work in any of the colleges, universities, or government buildings or government facilities in Bhaktapur should pay a higher tax from their income. So to discourage people who are coming into Bhaktapur to take the jobs over here. So by doing that, they have been able to control the gentrification that might have happened in Bhaktapur. We can argue whether this political decision was a good idea or a bad idea in a time where we really value democracy. You can also consider this as a very xenophobic policy. But for some reason, that this has maintained the unique cultural character of Bhaktapur, the character that the Newari people created. Another good example related to this particular scenario is this particular person who is an Bhaktapurian, a Newari person. He bought this dilapidated house and he restored or preserved this house to be a really beautiful place in a very authentic manner. So he also got a UNESCO medal for this preservation project, and UNESCO consider this is a model house, a model for how to restore, how to preserve historic buildings in Bhaktapur. So this gentleman wanted to sell this house to somebody. He said that he spent about $25,000 to restore that. But nobody can buy this property because of the regulation that the Bhaktapur's municipal council has, that nobody from outside of Bhaktapur can buy this property. So this house is not sold to anybody. So because of that, this person has decided to take his business out of Bhaktapur. When I talked about this particular scenario with couple of local architects in Bhaktapur who are doing historic preservation in the area, saying that isn't this a really good way to preserve a house? They told me that no, this is not the way to do that. This house is basically preserved to sold it to a rich person from outside of Bhaktapur, most probably some person from outside of Nepal. And they argued that this is not done to the taste of the local culture. So this is not for the local culture. This is actually for somebody outside who simply wanted to own a beautiful property inside Bhaktapur. So they think this is not the way to preserve. This is not the cultural way to preserve. So that's a very interesting argument. Although UNESCO recognized this as a model house, some of the local architects think that this is not the model that they want to follow in the preservation of historic properties in Bhaktapur. It should be something related to the local taste, not to some kind of westernized taste. Now, this photograph was taken by the German architects in 1975. What you see is that all around the town of Bhaktapur were agricultural lands at that time. So here are some photographs of that agricultural landscape. However, people have started building buildings, houses, etc. on this agricultural landscape. This agricultural landscape is an important and integral part of the heritage of Bhaktapur. It not only provides the supply of food to the town, it also could be considered as some kind of buffer zone that protects the old town from any encroaching urbanization happening from outside. So because of that, it's very important to preserve this particular agricultural landscape around the town. Not only that, the cultural traditions and the belief system and the lifestyle of Bhaktapur is also intricately connected to the agricultural practice happened for hundreds of years. So removing agriculture or in some way losing agriculture in Bhaktapur would negatively impact the maintenance and safeguard of various cultural traditions happening in Bhaktapur. So that's another reason the urbanization happening on this agricultural landscape needs to be controlled in some way, and this agricultural landscape should be preserved in order to preserve the heritage and architecture and cultural traditions within the city. Now here's a Google map showing this landscape around here. You can see that the historic town is this portion, but you can see that there are a lot of buildings happening here, and this area is completely subdivided into housing properties in Bhaktapur. So, and then this highway was built by the Chinese government to connect Nepal to China. So there are urban development happening along this, and that also kind of start to encroach into the town. Here is that river over here, so there is no preservation of the land around the river either. Now, the important thing is that river is now polluted. Although in people's belief system that people think that this is a sacred river, and they used to take ritualistic baths in this river to purify themselves, that river is now highly polluted. One of the aspect of pollution is that in 1975, the German architects who restored the town and the buildings established a sewerage system for the town. Now, that system has not been really maintained properly, and its capacity is not enough to handle the population in Bhaktapur right now. And all this sewage system is now connected to the river without any treatment of sewer. So this leads to the pollution of the river greatly. And in addition to that, there is a large garbage dump in the southern periphery of the town, actually next to the river, that also creates serious problem of pollution in the area. The town is regularly cleaned, and the streets are also swept regularly. All this garbage collected is not in some way recycled or treated. It's simply piled up at this edge, and that's why it leads into a serious pollution. So these are a range of historical preservation strategies that the government has come up with to preserve the heritage of Bhaktapur. However, there are also various issues happening around the city that are not conducive to the preservation of the area. So I'm going to talk about various ways that these issues could be managed in the next unit.